Hello class, and in this lecture we're going to be discussing the communication process. So let's get started. First, let's take a look at the communication process and its definition. So it's a process of creating and exchanging meaning through symbolic interaction. So one thing I want to point out here is that communication, although we are so accustomed to it being via words or written communication, all communication is symbolic because we're trying to get a meaning or a thought that's in our mind into someone else's mind, and hopefully in the same way that we understand our thought to be. And we can only use symbols, letters, words, actions, movements to communicate this message. So it's important that we recognize that communication is a process, an iterative process. It involves the sharing or the transmuting of meaning through symbolic interaction. Okay. Um, that interaction, as I mentioned before, can be both via words or sound. It can be written communication. It could also be, most importantly, nonverbal communications. And some people actually argue that nonverbal communication is far more telling or far more truthful than that of actually spoken or written communication. The communication process involves context, physical environment, and climate. What I mean by context is that it involves the people and the occasion or the reason for them interacting with each other, and also specific tasks or whatever it is that the communication is trying to accomplish. Or you could put this in the words like the motive of the communication. What is it actually trying to do? It also involves the physical environment. So this is the actual place where the communication takes place. And you can imagine that different places would evoke different levels of processing, different forms of understanding, and different interactions with the communication process. And lastly is climate. This refers to the emotional atmosphere that the communication is actually taking place in. For example, you can imagine that if a person is a fan of their favorite sports team and they just won the World Series, that in that environment and they're at the game, that's a very different emotional environment than, say, a person who is receiving the same message but they're at a funeral. So it's important to take these three things into consideration when you're communicating messages with people. Now let's take a look at the overall communication process. First, it starts off with the individual who we call the sender, and this is the person that's actually sending or communicating the message. Before they can even begin to form the message, they have to do what's called encoding, which is put the message into thought. They have to think about how are they going to frame this message? What does it mean? What are they really trying to communicate? From there, they have to actually then form the message. So this could be the process of actually writing out the email or framing the statement to send to somebody. From there, you have to decide what is the means or the channel that the communication is going to be sent through. All communication goes through a channel. Even if you're talking to someone face to face, the channel in that case is air. Your words are going through the air as sound vibrations and being received by the other person. But more broadly speaking, the communication channel could be your telephone, it could be email, it could be a written message, it could be a broadcast message through the television. The channel is really the means by which the message flows to the other person. The other person is what we call the receiver. This is the person or group of people that are actually receiving the message. They're hearing it. Now, once they hear it, it doesn't stop there because they have to then what we call decode the message. They have to process the message in such a way that it generates understanding to them. Now, when this happens, we would think, oh, the communication process is complete. Well, not exactly. The question I would say is, how do we know that the receiver has received the same exact message that the sender intended to send, so that the encoding that the sender has is equal to or equivalent to the decoding that the receiver has. And the only way we know that is through feedback. So in this mechanism, the receiver is sending back a message to the sender, informing them that, hey, I got what you said and here's how I understand it to be. Now, just like when any message is being sent, it has to be sent through a channel. So the receiver, in their own way, goes through an encoding process, a messaging process, and they send that message back through some kind of channel to the sender, who then goes through a decoding process, to understand the message, and then may give feedback to the receiver saying, hey, I understand what you said. I'm glad we're on the same page. Or, no, you didn't quite understand exactly what I said. Let's try this process again. Now, this is the communication process. You can see right away that it has to involve more than one person, or more than a sender and a receiver. It also is iterative, which means that the process is ongoing, it's circular. There's no end place or stopping point in communication. Additionally, it's also important to note that this is a very fragile process. It can be interrupted easily. It could be distracted or distorted easily. Say, for example, the receiver had some type of bias. I don't like people that are overweight, and they're trying to tell me that what a healthy diet should look like. So I have all these biases in me that if you were eating a healthy diet, your physical appearance would be different. Therefore, no matter what you say, I'm hearing it with this bias. And that's very difficult for the sender to overcome, that type of inherent bias that may be in the receiver. Similarly, the bias could be in the sender. I don't think that you're a very intelligent person. Therefore, I'm going to put this message in a way that reflects my bias. So I'm going to dumb the message down, or I'm going to say the message in such a complex manner to guarantee you don't receive it. So the sender could have biases that affect his or her encoding process and ultimately the message that's being formed. Also, people have biases. I really don't believe in what you're saying, or I don't believe in this program. Therefore, they don't put a lot of effort in terms of selecting the right channel. All these things can destroy the communication process. In addition, you have noise. So there are factors that take place out in the environment totally separate from the communication process, which may affect the ability for the message to be received. For example, maybe the television is on while someone is trying to talk to you on the phone. This is an example of noise. Or maybe you're trying to have a conversation with someone, but they're on their phone texting. And so they're dedicating some cognitive processing towards your communication, but then they're also got cognitive processing going towards their cell phone and looking at their Facebook or Instagram or whatever they're doing on their cell phone. These are things that take away from and distort the communication process. Then you have things which are called barriers, which are simply very strong items or situations that are in place which simply block communication. For example, you did all you could as a sender to encode the message, send it correctly, send it through a great channel, but there was something that just totally shut the communication down. Let's take a look at an example of the communication process. Mr. Sauceda wants to send a message. He wants students to know that they cannot bully each other. Therefore, he takes time to frame the message and writes it out. And the message, the formal message that he sends to students, not the thoughts that are in his mind, but the formal message is, bullying is unacceptable behavior, and you will be punished if you engage in bullying. The channel that he chooses to use to send the message out is the PA system. He announces it over the PA system to the entire school. The students hear it. The high school students hear the message, and they begin to decode it. And they say, I wonder if this includes stripping someone for fun. I don't know if this is exactly true or not. I heard the message, but I wonder, I was just playing a game with my friend. Is that considered bullying or not? I need clarification. So they engage in feedback. They frame their message, and they ask the question. Billy asks the question, is stripping someone for fun considered bullying? Now, he asks this to Mr. Sauceda directly. So the communication channel in this case is the air, or face-to-face communication, to which Mr. Sauceda then can answer the question. So he goes through an encoding process, a messaging process, the communication channel, and this process is completely iterative over and over and over again. And all the other barriers to communication, the things that could disrupt the communication, all come into play. Biases, ineffective channels of communication, etc. Now, let's talk about the other things that we mentioned that could disrupt the communication process, namely noise. So let's say the PA system was making a lot of noise and squeaking sounds as it was broadcasting the message. That would be noise, which would take away from the effectiveness of the communication. And I mentioned earlier in the last slide about barriers. So let's say, for example, there are some students who are in the gym doing athletics, and they just didn't hear the announcement at all. So that would be an example of a barrier to the communication. This is the communication model. It's very important that you understand that. Here are a couple other principles of communication that are important. 5 principles. 1, the communication process is transactional, meaning that it involves an exchange between one or more persons. So one person is sending a message, one person is receiving a message. Now, unlike a typical transaction, I went to the store, I gave this person money, and I took home a frozen pizza. I know that we had a successful transaction because I have the frozen pizza. Communication is not quite as obvious. I don't know that we had a good, solid transaction unless I get feedback from the person. And that feedback will let me know how effective my communication was. Do I need to go through the process again, iteratively, to make sure my message was completely understood, or was it understood correctly in the beginning? Another principle is that communication is complex. It is very complex, and for many reasons that I mentioned earlier, with the biases that individuals may have, the possibility for noise, the fact that you don't know if the message has been received correctly because it's something that's within a person's mind and you can't jump into their mind and confirm. But also for the reasons that are listed here on this slide here. I'm not going to go through each of them. That would make the lecture way too long. So I advise you to take some time, pause the video, read through each of these. But communication is interactive, it's symbolic. A person's culture and their personality plays on how they receive the message, also how they communicate messages. It's irreversible, meaning that once you put your message out there, you can't take it back. You can't say, oh, I renege, take that message back, because it's once it's sent, it's gone. It's circular, meaning that you have to continue the process over and over again with the individual to make sure that the communication was effective. And also communication is purposeful. There's generally a reason why someone is sharing a message, and you want to make sure that message is received accurately. And the last thing is that communication is difficult to duplicate. Each communication experience with a person is unique, and it can't be taken back, and it can't be copied exactly and sent to another person. Communication is also unavoidable. We live in a world where interaction with other people, places, and things is critical. And that interaction in and of itself is inherently communication. So you cannot avoid communication. We are always communicating, whether we like it or not, whether we're saying words or we're not saying words, whether we're writing or we're not. Most obvious is our nonverbal communication. And nonverbal communication, in many cases, can speak much louder than the actual words that a person uses. I may be saying, for example, I really like you, I value your input, thank you for your suggestion, but at the same time, if I'm rolling my eyes and smacking my lips and has this expression of complete and utter discontent on my face, my words, although they're very positive, are likely not to be received and deemed as being trustworthy. Communication is also continuous. And go back to the communication model and you can see that there was no stopping point. It is iterative over and over and over again. Have you ever gotten off on the wrong start with someone, for example, and it takes a lot of time to overcome that wrong impression? So once again, it's iterative. They have an impression of you, and now you're trying to correct that over and over, again, until you finally reach a place where you feel like it is corrected. Has someone ever said to you that you hurt their feelings and you've always remembered that? Or sorry, someone's ever hurt your feelings and you've always remembered it. So now when they're interacting with you, that becomes a frame that influences how you perceive what they do and what they say. So communication is continuous, is always ongoing. Communication skills can be learned. Okay, they can be learned, they can be improved over time by taking just these 5 principles and what we're going to talk about here in the next section. You can improve your communications over, skills with the person by understanding, a person's emotional state, the situation, the context, what mediums to choose to communicate your message. All these things can be improved in such a way that you can have more effective communication with people. And that comes through listening, through relationship building, and actually consciously working to improve your communication skills. Now, there are 5 levels of communication. The first level is an intrapersonal communication. Now, this is the communication that takes place within oneself, or what we call self-talk. We all do it. It does not mean that we're crazy, but we all engage in an internal dialogue with ourselves. For example, what am I going to wear to work today? I think I'll wear the red pants with the blue shirt, or well, that's a pretty horrible outfit. No, I'm not going to wear that outfit. Instead, I'll put the black pants on with the blue shirt. Yes, that looks good. Let's do that. And you're speaking to yourself. Now, we all engage in it, and it's important because this is the basis of our feelings, our biases, our prejudices, our beliefs, and we can begin to examine those things within ourselves to see, what are we bringing to the communication process? What are we bringing to various situations? Whether we're interacting with ourselves or we're engaging in self-speak as a preparation for interacting with someone else. Another level of communication is what we call interpersonal communication. So this is communications when you're dealing with another person one-on-one. So you're talking to a friend or you're talking to a teacher, and the communication model definitely applies here, as various biases may come into play, the communication channel and the medium. But interpersonal communication primarily focuses on your communication with another individual. Next, you have small group communication. And in this model, you have a small group of people, let's just say 8 people, and they're all communicating with each other. So you have a lot of interpersonal communication going on in this particular group. So person A may be talking to person B then talks to person C is talking to person E, person F and G are talking to each other. So the communication can be unilateral, it can be multilateral, it can be blast, one person talking to everyone. You have a lot of different communication structures that take place within a small group. The next model level we have is one to group. In this case, what you have is one individual who's talking to a group. For example, like a teacher who is teaching lectures. And he or she is standing up in front of the classroom, and a classroom of 30 students, and it's one person communicating to an entire group. Okay. The next level of communication is mass media or mass communication. Now this involves sending a message out to a large number of people. And typically when you get into mass communications, it is a one-way message. So I may print up a flyer or a poster or have a commercial on a radio station or a television, and I'm sending out a message to literally thousands and thousands of people. Now, how do I know my message has been received? Well, that's the more difficult part of mass communication, is that you don't tend to get feedback right away. If you do get feedback at all, it's delayed, or it may be in the form of market share or increased number of sales. So mass communication, it's important to note that it's one-way communication, but it still follows the entire communication model that we've outlined before. Now, we want to talk about what makes a competent or an effective communicator. And first and foremost, in order to be a competent communicator, you have to be ethical. You have to be honest and truthful with what you're sending to people. It also implies that you've done your due diligence so that you know what you're talking about and you're communicating it in a way that will promote the most efficient level of understanding and the most accurate level of understanding. But communication with a person who is not honest or not ethical, can we really call it communication? I think we can call it something else, such as lying or what have you. But it's important to note that all communication should be informed, logical, accountable, and reliable. Okay? So this all points to the fact of you as a sender that you should be responsible in your communication. You should make sure that you know the facts and that you're communicating something that truthfully and honestly. You should make sure that you're presenting it in a logical way, that you're not, that it's a way that people can understand and they can follow, that you take accountability for what you say, and that what you say is reliable. So no matter how things may change, what you said actually holds up and is still accurate, and it's something that people can count on as they're making decisions off of what you've said or done. A competent communicator is also accessible, meaning that they tend to have value positive relationships with their peers, supervisors, and clients. You're open and approachable, and you're caring, likable, and pleasant to be around. So a key part of being an effective communicator is that you have to be in a position where people can share their thoughts with you, that they can challenge your thoughts and ideas and engage in an iterative communication process, and that they believe that you are a person that cares and that's likable. Because if you're not, then the feedback process is greatly hindered, thereby truncating the entire communication model. Well, this is an overview of communication and how it works. If you have any questions, please be sure to email me. Thank you for your time.